Have you ever taken the last train home and felt like you weren't alone? Late at night, when the world is quiet, public transportation turns into something else. What time is it? I don't know. I did know. It was 11:55 p.m. I lose motivation to talk properly when I'm tired, although this was definitely an overreaction. At most, it would have taken an extra second to tell him the time, but I wasn't really thinking. I just wanted to get home, ignoring all social interactions. I didn't even look up to see this man's face. He left without saying anything, limping as he walked, leaving me alone at the bus stop, waiting for the final departure of the night. A single minute past midnight was the usual time on the schedule, although it's almost always late, despite only ever having a few passengers at most. My late shift at work had me used to these empty hours of the night. This specific part of town lacked in nightlife entertainment, leaving little reason to be out after dark. The shops were long closed, waiting for the bustling environment of the next morning. Until then, they remained silent. Some had their lights on all night long, spilling echoes of life into an otherwise inactive street. If the rapture occurred with me at this bus stop, it would take a long while for that news to reach me, as I simply continue waiting for an ever later, never arriving bus. These are the kind of thoughts I have as I wait in the dark for the bus. The occasional breaks in these thoughts are often caused by me checking the digital sign above me, displaying an estimated time for all upcoming departures. Expecting to see 5 minutes, or perhaps a more delayed 10 minutes, I hadn't planned on having to read a whole sentence. So, as I finished checking the sign, only then did my mind realize that it had not even seen a number. I had checked the sign but did not comprehend the content. My double take showed me what I had missed. The next bus is not real. Do not board. I stared for a moment before looking around. What I expected to see, I do not know. Perhaps some pranksters giggling at their work, or more sinisterly, a shadowy figure looming over to guide this paranormal event. Nothing. I saw nothing. The same street I had become familiar with had nothing new. It remained empty, with me as its only sign of life. So, I waited. It was 11:59 p.m. by this point, so only 2 more minutes remained. On time for what may have been the first time ever, the bus arrived. A single minute past midnight, and here it was. Pulling around the corner, approaching the stop, I put my hand out to signal my need to board, feeling relieved that my only way home hadn't been canceled. As the bus approached, I noticed the dark interior. The headlights were on, but the lights inside were all off. I could not make out whether any passengers were on board, or even who the driver was. Being a regular, I know most of the final route drivers, but this time it was anybody's guess. I got onto the bus, putting down the same change I always do. Bit dark, isn't it? Nobody replied as the doors closed behind me, and the bus continued its way forward. I smiled awkwardly despite knowing that the driver could not see me, and found a seat. I never found out whether there were any more passengers, but I can only hope that nobody else had to go through these next events. Almost immediately, I noticed stops being omitted from the route. A turn missed here, a completely wrong turn taken there. A panic set in that I had somehow gotten onto the wrong bus, despite knowing for a fact that the bus I always get is the only local one that runs this late. Convincing myself that an unfortunate series of road closures had occurred, I remained calm and waited it out. And after 10 minutes of this, we had circled back to the stop I'd boarded at. In front of us, I noticed a more normal bus. The bus I was supposed to board. The lights were on, with a few passengers. It was waiting at the stop. I spoke slightly louder than the rumble of the engine. "Excuse me, can I get off? I'm on the wrong bus." No answer as we slowly passed the correct bus. I could see the passengers inside all staring ahead. My gaze followed theirs, meeting at an ambulance, parked just slightly in front. A small group of paramedics knelt down, in the beam of the bus headlights, surrounding a body on the floor. I couldn't make out the body's face, as it was just out of sight, although one leg looked twisted. The passengers looked distraught, whilst the bus driver stood talking to the paramedics. I stood up. I need to leave at the next stop. As I spoke, I pressed the bell, and the only sign of any internal lights lit up at the front of the bus. Stopping. The sign then immediately turned off. Subsequent bell presses neither made the sound nor lit up the sign. The bus sped up suddenly, and the force pushing me back into my seat. As I tried to stand up again, the wheels screeched as we turned a sharp corner without seeming to slow down at all. Again, the force pushed me back down. The speed continued to rise. The wheels on the bus went faster and faster until the outside world became simply a blur. I had never seen a car go this fast, let alone a road vehicle as large as this. I thought for sure that I was going to die, right there. "What are you doing?" I found myself yelling out amid the panic. The driver, for the first and last time, spoke. "I don't know." My mind raced almost as fast as my body was being thrown about. The world beyond the windows soon morphed into a void of black, although the effects of our speed were still evident on my body. As the velocity pushed me in all directions, it felt as though we had somehow gotten even faster, although this may have been the darkness forbidding my eyes of any reference for our true speed. We came to a sudden stop as I fell forward. The fall was violent, but still not as bad as you'd expect for a speed change of that magnitude. My nose hit the floor, causing a great deal of pain. I stood up, holding my face, trying to regain my balance. As the dizziness subsided, I began to notice where I was. We were outside my home. The bus stop I get off at is a 5-minute walk from here. Yet here we were, directly outside my house. The doors gently opened. Despite my desire to leave as fast as possible, I found myself walking to the front of the bus. As I reached the door, I stopped, turning around slowly to face the still shrouded in darkness bus driver. I spoke what I always do. "Thank you." I stepped onto the pavement outside as the doors closed behind me, followed by the bus driving forward into the darkness. I looked down at my watch, a minute past midnight. Ethan had taken the same bus home for years. It was routine. 7:45 p.m., Route 16, the same driver, the same stops. He usually sat in the middle, put on his headphones, and zoned out until his stop. That night, the bus was nearly empty. A woman sat near the front, staring out the window. A man in a business suit sat across from Ethan, clutching a briefcase. Everything seemed normal, until he realized the bus wasn't stopping. It sped past the first station, then the second. Ethan frowned. Maybe the driver had missed them by accident? But then the third stop came and went without slowing down. He glanced at the woman near the front. She hadn't moved. The businessman still clutched his briefcase, staring straight ahead. No one seemed to notice. Ethan pulled out his phone and checked the time, 8:12 p.m. He should have been home by now. He stood up and walked to the driver. "Hey, I think you missed my stop." The driver didn't react. He gripped the wheel tightly, staring at the road. His knuckles were bone white. "Sir?" Ethan tried again. "Can you hear me?" Still no response. Ethan waved a hand in front of his face. Nothing. He was frozen, locked in place like a statue. A cold wave of fear crept up Ethan's spine. He turned to the woman in the front row. "Excuse me, do you know what's going on?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer and gently tapped her shoulder. Her head snapped toward him in an unnatural, jerky motion. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. Then, without moving her lips, she whispered, "You need to sit down." Ethan staggered back. "What?" The businessman turned his head slowly. His mouth didn't move, but he spoke in the same whisper. "Sit down before he notices." Ethan's heart pounded. "Who?" Neither of them answered. The bus lights flickered. A shadow passed across the aisle. Ethan turned, expecting to see another passenger, but the back of the bus was empty. Number not empty. Something was there. A figure stood at the far end of the bus, cloaked in darkness. Its face was obscured, its form shifting like smoke, and it was watching him. Ethan bolted for the exit doors and pounded on them. "Stop the bus! Let me out!" The doors didn't budge. The driver didn't react. The other passengers sat motionless, staring ahead. The figure moved closer. Ethan turned and ran down the aisle. He grabbed the emergency stop cord and yanked it. Nothing happened. He tried again, harder. The bus sped up. The wind outside howled, and the windows turned pitch black, like there was nothing beyond them. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You should have listened." The lights flickered again, and for a split second, Ethan saw the other passengers with hollow, black eyes, their mouths stretched into silent screams. And then, darkness. When Ethan woke up, he was sitting in his usual seat. The bus was parked at his stop. The doors were open. The driver, now perfectly normal, turned to him. "End of the line, kid." Ethan hesitated before stepping off. When his feet hit the pavement, he turned back. The bus was empty, and the driver had no face. The doors slammed shut, and the bus disappeared into the night. Daniel had taken the subway late at night countless times before. It was never a problem. Quiet, peaceful, sometimes eerie, but always predictable. That night, he caught the last train at 12:15 a.m. The car was nearly empty. A teenage girl sat across from him, absorbed in her phone. An old man in a ragged coat stared at the floor. The train pulled away from the station, and Daniel leaned back, letting the rhythmic clatter of the tracks lull him into a trance. But after a few minutes, he noticed something strange. The train wasn't stopping. The next station came and went. So did the one after that. The digital screen above the door still showed the name of the station he had boarded from. He turned to the girl. "Hey, do you know why the train isn't stopping?" She didn't look up. He tried again, louder. "Miss?" No reaction. Daniel stood and moved toward the conductor's cabin. The old man's eyes snapped up, watching him. As Daniel passed, the man grabbed his wrist with an iron grip. "Sit down," he croaked. Daniel yanked his arm away. "What's going on?" The old man's pupils were milky white. "You shouldn't have gotten up." The train lights flickered. The teenage girl was gone. Daniel turned in every direction. The car was empty except for him and the old man. The doors at the far end of the car slid open with a slow, agonizing creak. A dark figure stepped inside. Its limbs were too long, its fingers curling unnaturally. Its face was featureless, just smooth, pale skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. It didn't walk. It glided closer. Daniel stumbled back, pressing himself against the wall. The old man whispered, "You can't escape." Daniel bolted to the next car. It was full of people, silent, unmoving, their faces blank. He ran through the car, pushing past stiff bodies. He reached another door and yanked it open. Another car. More unmoving people. It was the same car. He had gone in a circle. The dark figure was waiting. Daniel turned, heart pounding. He pressed his back to the wall, breathing heavily. The train screeched to a halt. The doors slid open. A station. Without thinking, Daniel sprinted out. He collapsed onto the cold platform, gasping. The train sat still for a moment before the door shut, and it rumbled forward, disappearing into the tunnel. Daniel sat up and looked around. The station was empty. No signs, no maps, no exits. Only a single, flickering light. He checked his phone, no signal. The sound of another train rumbled in the distance. Then, from the darkness, a voice whispered, "Welcome home." Oliver had always taken the tram home from his late-night shifts. The city was quiet at this hour, the streets nearly empty, and the tram was usually peaceful. He enjoyed the solitude, the hum of the tracks beneath him, the dim glow of the streetlights passing by. That night, the tram was almost deserted. A woman sat near the front, flipping through a book. A man in a dark coat stood near the doors, staring at his reflection in the glass. Oliver took his usual seat by the window and exhaled. As the tram pulled away from the station, he felt a strange unease settle over him. Minutes passed, then more. Oliver checked his phone. 12:37 a.m. He had boarded at 12:15. His stop should have come and gone by now. He glanced out the window. Instead of familiar streets and buildings, there was nothing but an endless expanse of darkness. No landmarks, no streetlights, just void. His stomach tightened. He turned to the woman with the book. "Excuse me, do you know why the tram hasn't stopped?" She didn't respond. He tried again, louder. "Miss?" The man in the dark coat turned his head sharply. His eyes were too wide, too hollow. His lips parted, but no words came out. Then the tram lights flickered. When they came back on, the woman was gone. Oliver shot to his feet, his pulse hammering. He spun around. Empty seats stretched in every direction, except for the man in the coat. He was standing closer now, much closer. Oliver backed up. What is this? Where are we? The man tilted his head, his mouth twitching as if trying to form words. Then, in a voice that wasn't entirely human, he whispered, "You were never supposed to be here." The tram shuddered. The windows darkened further, like ink spilling over glass. Oliver stumbled toward the emergency button and slammed his palm against it. Nothing happened. The tram wasn't slowing down. It was speeding up. He turned toward the driver's cabin. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. There was no driver, no controls, just a row of empty seats. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. He turned back to the main car. The man in the coat was gone. But Oliver was no longer alone. Rows upon rows of passengers filled the tram. Their faces were blank, their eyes black voids. They sat in perfect silence, motionless. A whisper crawled through the air. "Take a seat." Oliver turned to run, but the tram lurched violently. The world outside the windows twisted and spun, shapes forming and dissolving like smoke. He gripped a pole, trying to stay upright. "Let me out!" he shouted. The tram jerked to a sudden stop. The doors slid open. A station. But not one Oliver recognized. The platform was cracked, covered in dust. The walls lined with flickering dim lights. There were no signs, no exits. Only an endless corridor stretching into darkness. A whisper came from the depths of the station. "Time to get off." Oliver hesitated. He turned back toward the tram. It was empty. The seats, the windows, the walls. Gray and lifeless, like an abandoned relic. The tram let out a low, shuddering groan. The doors began to close. Panic surged through Oliver. He had no choice. He stepped onto the platform. The tram pulled away, disappearing into the tunnel. Silence. Oliver turned toward the corridor. The lights flickered, one by one, leading him deeper into the unknown. A final whisper drifted through the air. "Welcome to your final destination." The night bus was nearly empty when Ryan boarded, just the way he liked it. After a long shift at the diner, all he wanted was a quiet ride home. He slid into his usual seat near the middle and exhaled. 2 other passengers sat near the front, an old woman hunched over a shopping bag, and a man in a baseball cap staring out the window. The bus pulled away from the station, rolling down dark, empty streets. Ryan pulled out his phone and checked the time. 11:58 p.m. Then he noticed something strange. The bus wasn't stopping. It passed the next stop without slowing, and the one after that. Ryan leaned forward, frowning. Maybe the driver hadn't seen them. But as another stop disappeared behind them, unease prickled at his skin. He glanced at the old woman. Did the driver announce a route change? She didn't react. Ryan looked at the man in the baseball cap. "Hey, did you hear anything?" The man didn't turn. Ryan shifted in his seat. Something was off. He stood and walked toward the front. "Excuse me, sir?" He tapped the driver's shoulder. The driver didn't move. Ryan's stomach clenched. He waved a hand in front of the man's face. Nothing. The driver was completely still, hands gripping the wheel, eyes locked straight ahead. Then the radio crackled. A distorted voice whispered through the speakers. "Sit down." Ryan flinched. His pulse pounded. "Who said that?" Silence. He turned back toward the passengers. The man in the baseball cap was gone. The old woman, too. His breath caught. His seat, the one he had been sitting in, was empty. The bus lights flickered. For a brief moment, the windows revealed nothing but darkness. No streets, no buildings, no city, just an endless, swirling void. Ryan's knees went weak. He stumbled back toward the middle of the bus. He had to get off. Now he pulled the stop request cord. Nothing happened. The bus kept going faster now, the engine growling like a living thing. The intercom crackled again. "You shouldn't have gotten up." Ryan turned in every direction. The bus was still empty. Number not empty. A figure stood at the far end, wrapped in shadows. It wasn't there before. Ryan's breath hitched. The figure moved. Slow. Deliberate. Ryan lunged for the emergency exit and slammed his hands against the glass. "Let me out!" The figure took another step closer. The lights flickered again. When they returned, the figure was standing right behind him. Ryan spun around. A face stared back at him. His own face, twisted, hollow, eyes completely black. It smiled. The bus screeched to a stop. The doors slid open. A station stood outside, but not one Ryan recognized. The sign above the platform was blank. Ryan turned back to the bus. It was empty again. The driver, the seats, everything. Dust-covered, like it had been abandoned for years. A whisper curled through the air. "Time to go home." Ryan stepped off the bus. The doors slammed shut. The vehicle pulled away, vanishing into the blackness. He turned to look at the station. A long, endless hallway stretched before him. Flickering lights buzzed overhead. In the distance, footsteps echoed. Someone was waiting for him. Ryan's footsteps echoed through the desolate hallway, swallowed by the flickering lights above. His breath was shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears. There was no turning back. The bus was gone, and the station stretched infinitely before him. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. The footsteps ahead grew louder, closer. A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Ryan hesitated, but something urged him forward. A force stronger than fear, stronger than reason. As he took another step, the lights above flickered again, this time plunging the hallway into complete darkness. Silence. Then, a whisper. "You're home now." The lights snapped back on. The hallway was gone. Ryan stood in front of his apartment door. His hands trembled as he reached for the handle. He stepped inside. The door shut behind him. Somewhere in the reflection of a darkened window, something watched, and it smiled. Michael had taken the subway home every night for the past 5 years. He knew the system by heart. The last train always came at 12:05 a.m., and he'd be home by 12:40. That night, he was late. He sprinted down the stairs just in time to see the train doors sliding shut. He cursed under his breath. Then, to his surprise, another train pulled into the station. It looked identical to his usual line, except the doors were already open, waiting for him. Michael hesitated. There was no announcement, no other passengers waiting. The train didn't even make a sound as it arrived. But he was exhausted. He had no choice. He stepped inside. The doors shut immediately. The car was empty. No advertisements on the walls, no maps, no signs. Just rows of gray seats. The train moved. Michael sighed and leaned back. Maybe it was an express train? That would explain why no one else was on board. But after a few minutes, he noticed something. The train wasn't stopping. It should have reached the next station by now. He checked his phone, no signal. He stood and walked toward the conductor's cabin. "Excuse me." No answer. He knocked. "Hello? Where are we going?" Silence. Then the train dropped. Not like a normal descent, it fell. Michael slammed against the wall as gravity yanked him down. His stomach lurched. The windows blurred, showing flashes of strange, twisting tunnels. The train wasn't moving forward anymore. It was going down. Panic surged through him. He grabbed onto a pole, heart racing. What the hell is happening? Then it stopped. The doors slid open. A station, but not any station Michael had ever seen. The walls were smooth and black, like polished stone. Strange symbols covered every surface, glowing faintly. The platform stretched endlessly in both directions. There were no people, no exit signs. Michael swallowed hard. He wasn't supposed to be here. Then he heard it. A sound like wet footsteps, coming from the dark tunnel beyond the platform. Something was approaching. Michael turned back to the train. The doors were still open, but the car was no longer empty. Rows of passengers now filled the seats, motionless, silent, their faces hidden in shadows. And they were all looking at him. A voice echoed from the tunnel, low and rasping. "You missed your stop." Michael ran. He bolted down the platform, searching for an exit. His footsteps echoed in the endless station. Then He saw it. A single escalator leading up. He sprinted toward it. The sound of footsteps behind him grew louder. He didn't dare look back. He jumped onto the escalator. It was moving up, fast, too fast. The glowing symbols on the walls blurred past him. Then, a blinding flash. The next thing Michael knew, he was standing in his usual subway station. The 12:05 train pulled in. Commuters rushed past him like nothing had happened. Michael turned back. The escalator was gone, and in its place, scrawled on the station wall, was a single glowing word: next time.